Hello, everybody, and welcome to the HealthForce podcast, RamsandEliteFitness.com, RamsandEliteFitness.com. I want to explain to people today on the podcast why you crave certain foods. Okay, I think this is a great topic. There are going to be a couple of theories that we're going to talk about, and I want to start with the demonization of certain ingredients or certain foods and why that's incorrect. Break it down a little bit and then come up with a couple of theories of our own. Because I think it's very important if you're going to go on a diet, if you're thinking about nutrition in a specific way, you're trying to achieve certain outcomes, a certain goal of yours for fitness, I think it is critically important to understand the actual science behind things, why your body is reacting a certain way, what it's going through. I think it's very, very high-level knowledge to know, and I think it's going to benefit you in the long run. So we're going to begin with one popular theory that I know we've all heard is that sugar is addictive. Sugar is a toxin. Sugar is poison. The body doesn't really know how to handle it. The body handles it by secreting a ton of insulin. Our bodies become insulin resistant. We store more body fat this way. The fat, the stored cells aren't responsive to other hormones, things like that, and we kind of get out of whack from sugar. So that's where we're going to begin and to kind of delve into that a little bit and see what we can dig up. I have an article here written by Stefan Guyenet, PhD. I know he's like a neurobiologist, a researcher, a trusted source of mine. He has an article from his website, stefanguyenet.com. The article is entitled Bad Sugar or Bad Journalism, an expert review of the book, The Case Against Sugar. So The Case Against Sugar is a book by Gary Taubes, who has been a frequent source of topic on our podcast, as he seems to be now the one of, if not the leading voice of this, theory. I don't know if that's even the right word, but he's the biggest advocate that our bodies are overweight. We are storing body fat, not because of calories, not because of overconsumption, but because of sugar, overconsumption of sugar. So he pinpoints and attempts to pinpoint that one specific nutrient as the reasoning for their increasing rate of obesity. Let's hop into the article. I've been asked by a number of people to review Gary Taubes' new book, The Case Against Sugar. I reluctantly agreed that it would probably be a good idea for me to do so. In this post, I'll provide something that is not available anywhere else. It's a review of the book from the perspective of a former researcher who is an expert in some of the topics that it discusses. The Case Against Sugar is a journey through sugar history and science that argues the point that sugar is the principal cause of obesity, diabetes, coronary heart disease, and many other common non-communicable diseases. This differs from the prevailing view in the research and public health communities that obesity and non-communicable diseases are multifactorial, with refined sugar playing a role, among others, things like excess caloric intake, physical inactivity, cigarette smoking, alcohol, illegal drug use, and various other diet and lifestyle factors. I tend to side with the latter view, in case anyone is wondering. I've never had any contact with sugar industry, and I have no other relevant conflicts of interest. I'll break the review into two parts, first covering the historical aspects of the book, and the second covering the scientific aspects. I want to stop here and interject here in 1 second. I think this is very, very critical before we get going here to set this context about what the individuals such as Gary Taubes are arguing, and they are trying, as I mentioned, pinpoint, really zoom in on one thing, one little process in the body to explain a very, very complex situation. And this article will do a good job of addressing some of the claims by Gary Taubes. We'll bring in, Stefan's understanding of research, what the current landscape looks like, see if the claims are actually even backed by what we already know, what we've already tested. But I think that one sentence sums up this entire debate, is that Gary Taubes wants to blame one specific thing while the scientific wing, the research wing, myself included, view obesity as multifactorial. There are a lot of things that cause somebody to become obese. It's not one thing. If you're somebody that is now 400 pounds, you are doing more than one thing incorrectly or insufficiently in order to keep your weight low. it's not just overeating one item or, I'm just not working out enough. There's a lot at play. It's very, very complex. Your body does adapt to a lot of these things. So as you gain weight, your body starts to become, it becomes insensitive to insulin. Things like this happen. But really, trying to figure out what the one or two causes are, I think it's short-sighted. I'm going to actually skip a little bit here of this article. He does talk about, the history of it going back as far as like the 60s and 70s, and I think it's interesting. So if you're interested in reading that, you can go ahead and do that on StefanGuillenet.com, StefanGuillenet.com, and read this article. Covers it a good bit, and Stefan kind of he yields the point that Gary actually does a decent job kind of bringing some facts, and I think even some things that Stefan didn't know. So it wasn't necessarily something that was like super controversial. I think he did misquote a scientist, and we'll get to that here. But we're going to jump into the science portion since that's what I'm interested in here. So here we are. Scientifically, the case against sugar suffers from a condition Steven Pinker has called the eigenvalue problem. This term describes the tendency of certain science journalists to arrive at obtuse conclusions due to a superficial understanding of their subject matter. There are many examples of this in the case against sugar, but the underlying theme is that Taubes misunderstands or he chooses not to apply the scientific method itself. Evidence of this can be found on the very first page. Quote, "The purpose of this book is to present the case against sugar, both sucrose and high fructose corn syrup, as the principal cause of the chronic diseases that are most likely to kill us, or at least accelerate our demise, in the 21st century. If this were a criminal case, the case against sugar would be the argument for the prosecution." Close quote. Trials proceed by very different principles than science does. The prosecutor is not expected to present a balanced case. He is expected to be biased against the defendant. What ensures balance is the legal process, is the inclusion of a defendant who is equally biased in favor of himself. Yet in the case against sugar, the defendant is nowhere to be found. What results is an argument that is carefully crafted to support the prosecution, while facts that support the defense are omitted, minimized, or misrepresented. I do want to inject here. So I think Stefan, I think he's giving Gary Taubes too much credit. Gary Taubes did not write this book to present a non-biased, evidence-based report on sugar. He wrote this book to be exactly like he said it is, the prosecution against sugar. It's very, very biased. He's going to use facts that support his opinions only. He's going to omit all the things that fly in the face of it, that go against what he's trying to claim. This is not a down-the-middle-of-the-road book. It is very biased. So I think Stefan's giving him too much credit by trying to say that he's picking a side. I think he's well aware. I think he all along intentioned to pick only one side. The eigenvalue problem doesn't take long to rear its ugly head. In the introduction, Taubes deploys an argument that he believes is sufficient to negate most of the scientific literature on obesity and chronic disease. Here's the drum roll. Occam's razor. Quote, "If this were a criminal investigation, the detectives assigned to this case would start from the assumption that there was one prime suspect, one likely perpetrator, because the crimes," and he lists all the diseases, "are so closely related. They would only embrace the possibility that there were multiple perpetrators when the single suspect was proved insufficient to explain all the evidence. Scientists know this essential concept as Occam's razor." What if, and that's close quote, "What if I were to tell you that the structure of DNA is actually a single straight strand rather than a double helix? Would you believe me just because my hypothesis is simpler than the conventional one?" The answer is of course not, and for good reason. Evidence suggests that more complex hypothesis is correct. The truth is that Occam's razor is a weak argument that only applies when two hypotheses are equally well supported or equally unsupported. As soon as one hypothesis has a stronger evidence basis than another, Occam's razor becomes irrelevant. Yet for Taubes, this flimsy argument is sufficient to throw most of the relevant scientific literature out the window, besides, of course, a few tidbits that support the prosecution. Well, that's exactly what these guys have to do, though. They have to, Occam's razor, I want to sound smart. They have to go there and use these sort of arguments. They have to. Because the evidence, in contrary to Taubes' belief, is enormous. It is it is the position of myself and many others in this research, scientific wing, that there's plenty of evidence to refute Taub's claims. It's not so much that there isn't evidence to, that he's just throwing something out there and that it's not disproven or that the opposite is true. No, it very much is so. Very much is so. Besides its misapplication of Occam's razor, the passage above manifests the eigen value problem in a second way. The diseases in question are actually not all correlated with one another, or even with sugar intake. Statistics demonstrating this are readily available. For example, sugar intake is higher today in the U.S. than it was in the 1970s, and while obesity has increased threefold, coronary heart disease mortality has declined by over 60%. Taubes neglects to inform the reader that sugar intake has been declining since 1999 in the U.S., a period over which obesity and diabetes have increased substantially. Taubes argues that sugar is the only factor that reliably shows up when a culture develops Western non-communicable diseases, supporting the point with examples of cultures that adopted sugar-rich diets and became ill. Yet he makes no effort to look for counterexamples that could refute this argument. A traditionally living culture that has a high intake of sugar and does not suffer from Western non-communicable diseases. If such a culture can be found, this piece of evidence is sufficient to reject Taubes' argument that sugar reliably associates with the onset of these diseases in a population. Well, let's do Taubes' research for him. A well-studied Tanzanian hunter-gatherer tribe called the Hasda get 15% of its average year-round calorie intake from honey, plus fruit sugar on top of it. This approximates U.S. sugar intake, yet the Hasda do not exhibit obesity, cardiovascular disease, or any of the other disorders that Taubes attributes to sugar. In fact, many hunter-gatherer groups rely heavily on honey historically, including tribes of the Congo, whose diet was up to 80% honey during the rainy season, yet they do not have obesity or insulin resistance. Okay, and think about this, folks. Like, when we're talking hunter-gatherer days or parts of the world that are still fighting for food and really struggling, they aren't blessed with the culture that we are here in America, where food isn't of abundance. I don't think people are going around nitpicking for food. Honey and fruit, these things are found because they grow on trees, right? There's not packaged Twinkies, there's not cupcakes, there's not cookies in these sort of cultures or in history for traditional hunter-gatherer tribes. Being able to find honey, being able to find trees that grow fruit, those are commonplace. That's what they're going to eat. Therefore, their diets are going to be, as Stefan mentions, 80% fruit and sugar. And that alone refutes this claim that, oh my God, if your intake of sugar is so high, there's a big correlation between intake of sugar and disease. Here's a third example. Taubes upbraids the research community for its belief that body fatness is determined by caloric intake rather than the impact of foods on insulin. He supports the latter proposition with semi-anecdotal observations from Africa, suggesting that a group of people eating a high-sugar diet supplying as little as 1,600 calories per day were sometimes obese and diabetic. A person who actually wants to get to the bottom of this question should conduct their investigation in a very different manner. The first order of business is to look up the relevant metabolic ward studies, which are the most tightly controlled diet studies available. These studies consistently show that calorie content is the only known food property that has a meaningful impact on body fatness. This is true across a wide range of carbohydrate to fat ratios and sugar intakes, and a correspondingly wide range of insulin levels. What makes Taubes' oversight so extraordinary is that he was involved in funding one of the metabolic ward studies, which compared two diets that differed more than tenfold in sugar content. The results showed that a 25% sugar, high carbohydrate diet caused slightly, you ready for this, folks? Get them ears ready, put those ears up. It caused slightly more body fat loss than a 2% sugar, very low carbohydrate, keto style of equal calories. Oh no. Despite these clear and consistent findings, Taubes continues to insist that calorie intake is not an important determinant of body fatness, and he offers the reader questionable evidence in support of this while admitting high-quality evidence to the contrary, all while exuding righteous indignation about the scientific community's misguided beliefs. Look, folks, this isn't rocket science, man. This guy's entire career is based upon this insulin model. Okay, that's how he thinks you get cravings for sugar. This is how he thinks you get obese. This is the problem of everything. You heard him: diabetes, coronary heart disease, you name it. It's the works. It's just sugar. It's all sugar. The bottom line is Gary Taubes is incapable of understanding opposition research at this point in the game. He's committed. He's all in. If you were to listen back to one of our first podcasts, back in the day when we first started to introduce the idea of the fanatical movement, those that we would consider fanatics, pseudoscience experts, that was a key characteristic. Being all in on a subject. It's their life work. It's their career. It's how they make a living. It's how they make money. There's no different for Taubes. There's no different. If he were to acknowledge any sort of evidence that his theory and model is wrong, he's finished. He's done. He's done. Therefore, by the nature of this thing, it's just he can't understand it. It's incapable. He's got to deflect. He's got to dismiss. He can't. Another question you might be having right now is, why are we discussing Gary Taubes? Why are we discussing sugar? His book. What does this have to do with craving? And I hope you stick with me through this podcast, because it's of the utmost importance that we discuss sugar first, because this is the one nutrient that is constantly thrown in the spotlight as something that is addictive. This is the pinnacle of this topic, right? This is the centerpiece, the trophy, sugar. And I want everybody in this audience to have a comprehension of sugar before we get into what I believe to be a more common sense approach to addictive foods, or why we crave foods, or why we want to eat desserts. And I think it's very, very utterly important that we dismiss this insulin idea first, and then we'll get into what's actually going on behind the scenes here. Okay? So just bear with me. We're almost done with this book. We're almost done with this book review. Just a few more lines I want to read about this. Actually, I'm going to skip ahead. So I'm going to skip ahead to the conclusion, okay? Here's the bottom line about the book. Science is imperfect, and scientists are as well. Pioneers such as John Ioannidis, Brian Nozick, Vinayak Prasad, Adam Sifu, Chris Chambers, David Allison, making a good faith effort to identify flaws in the scientific process and address them. Journalists have an important role to play here as well, by helping to identify problems and raising awareness about how to fix them. Taubes also views science as flawed, but primarily where it disagrees with his personal beliefs. So rather than contribute to the solution, Taubes adds to the problem by promoting an unscientific thought process that systematically excludes opposing evidence. To answer the question posed in the title, refined sugar is bad, although not the singular cause of all of humankind's ills. A core principle of journalism is the accurate, objective, and complete transmission of pertinent facts to the reader. And again, I would put in here as a side note, I don't think he's trying to be a journalist. He's being a very biased, opinionated book, period. He's not even trying to be a journalist. The Case Against Sugar is a journey through sugar history and science that is heavily distorted through the lens of Taubes' personal beliefs. By this metric, it is not journalism, but advocacy. To a general audience that has little basis for evaluating its claims, this book will be misleading. Yet for readers who are willing to take The Case Against Sugar with a case full of salt, it does contain some interesting history. So that is Stefan Guyenet's assessment of the process and a little bit of the science. I encourage you, if you were intrigued by that, you can read that entire article. So let's start talking right now about why we crave certain foods. And I want to pose to you a question. I'm going to give you two choices, A and B. Which food do you crave more? A, pizza, or B, broccoli and zucchini? A, pizza, B, broccoli and zucchini. Which one is more craving to you? Which one do you want more? Now, if you're being honest with yourself, 99% of the audience is going to say pizza is. Pizza. Before I really thought about this subject, before I really even considered, the science behind cravings and what's driving ourselves to feel that certain way, because it's a feeling. It's not a rational thought. It's not like we sit there and think through why pizza tastes good and looks good and why broccoli and zucchini doesn't do it for us. Like, that's not a rational thought. It just is. Snap your fingers. Don't want broccoli, want pizza, right? I was thinking along the lines that it has to do something with the brain or the body understanding that food item, aka pizza, has a lot of calories in it. There's a lot of calories there, and since our bodies are still hardwired through evolution for the past, it still wants foods that are caloric, high in calories. It still wants that because it still runs on this idea that it doesn't know where there's food everywhere. It doesn't understand this yet. The body doesn't it doesn't have it's not able to think, right? It's not an active thinker. So it somehow knows there must be a system that the body knows that food has a lot of calories in it, and that's going to be better for survival than a food that has virtually 0 calories like broccoli and zucchini. That was always my gut feeling on this. But I didn't understand. I wasn't into it enough to like go research, get into PubMed, really dig deep into the articles and the archives to find the actual process, what this actually is. And thankfully, I don't have to because the same man, Dr. Stefan Guyenet, has written a book that's available on Amazon.com, Barnes and Nobles, Books A Million, you name it, you can find it. It's called The Hungry Brain: Outsmarting the Instincts That Make Us Overeat. Okay, and I was listening to a podcast on Sigma Nutrition, which is Danny Lennon's podcast, and he had Stefan on to talk about this book a little bit, and it in some ways it backed up what my gut reaction was, is that there is a system in place. The body does, has the ability to understand calories and caloric content and things like fat, carbohydrates, and protein, and gives you feedback on those foods so that in the future, if you come across them, to eat them. So I'm on Stefan Guyenet's website, and I'm on the Hungry Brain. I'm going to read a little bit of this, and then I'm going to kind of go off on my own a little bit and kind of summarize the Sigma Nutrition interview and some of the key aspects of this book. No one wants to overeat, and certainly no one wants to overeat for years, become overweight, and end up with a high risk of diabetes or heart disease. Yet 2/3 of Americans do precisely that. In my book, The Hungry Brain, I argue that the problem is not necessarily a lack of willpower or an incorrect understanding of what to eat. Rather, our appetites and food choices are led astray by ancient instinctive brain circuits that play by the rules of a survival game that no longer exists. And these circuits don't care about how you look in a bathing suit next summer. To make the case, The Hungry Brain takes readers on an eye-opening journey through cutting-edge neuroscience that has never before been available to the general audience. Illustrated with beautiful images, The Hungry Brain delivers profound insights into why the brain undermines our weight goals and transforms these insights into practical guidelines for eating well and staying slim. Along the way, it explores how the human brain works, revealing how this mysterious organ makes us who we are. So first off, the brain, I feel like as much as research that we have on it, and we still really don't know a lot. I still think there's a lot to discover about it, and I do think the brain operates a lot of the body processes. I think it's obvious, but I think there's even things like this appetite and this craving thing. Stefan's going to make the case that the brain is actually in charge of this system. Okay, it's in charge of understanding what foods present what caloric content, what kind of value to the survival mechanism, and then it's going to then encourage you to eat certain foods over others. Okay, and the way he explains it essentially is, as you eat a food, the body, when it goes through digestion, it's almost like there is a report system in the gut. Okay, we all know the gut's very, very important for a variety of reasons. There's bacteria, in there. There are now connections between negative things like stress and then gut health, disease and gut health. It's a very important system. And so Stefan makes the case that the gut, as it eats and digests foods, almost sends a report to the brain and says, look, whatever the hell you just ate, wow, there was a lot of calories in that thing. Or, there's a lot of fat, there's a lot of carbs, and some protein in that thing. That thing is great. And it makes like a little report, and it sends it to the brain. And then the brain learns that the food that you've eaten, the smells, all that good stuff, it now knows that food has a high caloric value to the human body for survival purposes. So the next time you see pizza, your body's going to give you those feedback that you should eat it. It's going to make it smell good. It's going to make it taste good. It's going to make it look good. Your body wants you to eat that pizza because it understands the caloric value of that food. Does that make sense to anybody? So when you think about developing that taste for pizza over years of time, your body knows pizza very, very well. It understands what it's getting when it sees a pizza, and it wants you to eat that. Because our bodies still do operate an evolutionary history, like we're hunter-gatherers, we're roaming the planet, we're looking for food. Imagine how valuable it would be if you were roaming the plains or the desert and you found a pizza. Imagine that. Imagine finding a pizza of like 1,500 calories of pizza. That would be so critical to your survival. So that's kind of what your body is thinking when it sees a pizza every time. And it has the ability to conjure up that feedback for yourself. Your mouth waters, the smells, all of it. Your sensory in it. Right? It's an unbelievable, I guess you want to call this theory about cravings. But I absolutely had this gut instinct that this is what was happening. Like the body knows food because your bodies are amazing. Your body always will adjust to things. It always adjusts to things. It's amazing at feedback. All the messages that are sent from cells to the bloodstream to this to that. It's amazing. It's amazing. So what happens is when it sees a pizza, it sees high fat, high carbs, decent protein. Hey, that's a nice value. That's a nice food. There's a lot of things in there. Let's eat it. When you look at something like broccoli, no calories, no fat, hardly any protein, carbohydrate, but really just fiber. It's not easy. We can't even digest fiber. I think the same thing happens. Your body gets a report on broccoli and says, Hey, it's got some micronutrients in there. It keeps us full. So if we're really, really hungry, it works. But you know what? It's just not great nutritional value in terms of calorie density. It's just really not. I'd much rather have a pizza. I think Stefan dips a little bit into our bodies are, through the evolutionary process are hardwired for sugar. Which is a great case talking about these tribes that are used to drinking like this honey and eating fruit. Well, that's a lot of carbohydrate. That's a lot of sugar. And since that's going to be a resource that if you're a hunter or gatherer, you're going to come across a fruit tree or something, and it's going to be a very valuable resource for food for you. Your body's going to learn about sugar, and he makes the case that babies can if you give the baby sugar, it actually reacts like it knows. On a subconscious or on a, molecular level that sugar is good, and that's what I want. It's amazing. Absolutely amazing. Absolutely amazing. So I highly recommend you check out this book, The Hungry Brain, Dr. Stefan Guillenet. Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, IndieBound, iBooks, you name it, you can find it. I think it's going to be quite the counterpunch to something like Gary Taubes, who wants to look at one little thing and try to put the entire mystery of the human body. Guys, look, our human bodies are so complex. You can't boil it down to one thing like that. To me, it's just, I'm going to go as far as dishonest. I really do. I can't imagine somebody can look at the situation of health and literally try to make it that simple. The world doesn't work that way. The body doesn't work that way. There are multiple reasons why somebody has, for instance, a heart attack, a stroke. It's just high blood pressure. Like there's so many things that can factor in, and there's so many factors that can change certain circumstances. That's why I think that this book really gives a nice overarching theme about cravings and talks about calories, and that your body doesn't care about wanting a six-pack. In fact, it really doesn't want one. That's, to me, it's actually in some ways more simple and more easy to understand approach than someone like Taubes, even though he's blaming one thing only. And when you look at a book like The Hungry Brain, we're talking about a complex system of feedback and calories and all these different macronutrients. In some ways, it makes more sense, right? It's just easier to understand. Yeah, our bodies want a lot of food. Hey, that's why it learns about what foods have a lot of calories, and it wants it. Makes sense. So here's my takeaway message. Okay? I think a lot of control really comes down to willpower. I do. I know Dr. Guillenet does not necessarily blame a lack of willpower as the example, but to me, in order to try to override something as your brain telling you and almost commanding you to eat certain specific foods because of their calorie value, it's not going to be fixed by just going on a paleo diet. It's not going to be solved that way. I think the key is education. So first, learning about this topic, understanding it, doing more research on your own about this, further exploring this to see if you really buy into it. That's half the battle, just knowing. And then every time you see a pizza and wondering why you want it when you're on a diet and you can't have it or you shouldn't have it, I think you're able to make a rational decision to avoid it because you understand where it's coming from. I think so, and I think it is willpower. I'm not somebody that likes to blame individuals, but at a certain point, if you're 400 pounds, 300 pounds, 350 pounds, yes, you are being sent those signals to eat a lot of food, right? I'm not denying that, and it's hard. It's hard to resist. I'm not saying it's as easy, but you just haven't done a good job of resisting that, right? You just don't have the willpower, and I think that's something that we, instead of blaming things, and this is and hold on. Let me set this up properly. This is so important. I want to make sure we do this right. Get those ears ready. Get those ears perked up. Here we go. Regardless of what theory you actually believe, whether it's sugar, whether it's this, GMOs, whether it's gluten, whether it's an overconsumption of food, whether it's this hungry brain theory, whatever you go with as to explain people's obesity, the rates of obesity and disease, whatever theory you go with, I am encouraging you not to dismiss blame from yourself. Don't do it. By dismissing, you remove the power to control your own outcome. You really do. What instead you should do is, look, there might be things working against me, things might be hard, but at the end of the day, I have to resist. I have to not have an entire pizza to myself. I can't do that. That's not going to be good for me. I think if you give yourself the power, if you give yourself the ability to understand why you want certain foods and crave certain foods, I think you give yourself a really big leg up when it comes to that willpower. So I encourage you all to foster that at all times. Download the book, Hungry Brain, read through it, think about it, follow up, do your own research, learn more, and formulate your own strategies to resist eating an entire pizza. I would very much encourage you to do that. RamsleyFitness.com, RamsandLeeFitness.com, social media, Facebook and Instagram is that Ramsley Fitness. Email RamsleyFitness@gmail.com. Happy to hear feedback, and I look forward to seeing and hearing from you all next week. See you all.